All right, strap in, folks, because today we're diving deep into a blog post that's, well, let's just say the title alone is enough to raise some eyebrows. A dish best served cold.
Ooh, that's ominous.
Right, we're talking January 2025, straight from the digital think tank of WOTE.UK, a UK political organization. And yeah, they're not exactly mincing words here.
Definitely sounds like the UK political scene is still pretty shaken up after that July 2024 election. And this blog post, I mean, it's basically a manifesto for, well, for some pretty radical change.
And holding back at all, are they? We've got talk of election interference, calls for a complete system overhaul, and even some, how should I put this? Some very strong feelings about a couple of familiar names, Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
It's really interesting, the way they connect these global figures to the UK's internal struggles. They seem to view Trump and Musk as like symbols of this worldwide shift, and they think the UK needs to get on board. But they start by really taking aim at the Labour Party, arguing that their recent actions, specifically their negativity towards Trump and Musk, have really damaged the UK's relationship with the US.
So they're basically saying Labour messed things up so badly that the entire system needs a hard reset.
Yeah, that seems to be the gist of it. They even refer to the illegitimate July 4th election, which I'm assuming is what they're calling the election that brought Labour to power.
Right, their term for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so to get why they're so fired up, we need to understand the UK's first past-the-post electoral system.
Right. FPTP, as it's often called. It's a winner-takes-all kind of system where the candidate with the most votes in a district wins, even if they don't have, a majority. The author argues that this is a flawed system, especially in a multi-party system like the UK has. Think about it. The vote gets split among several parties, and, one party could end up winning with, say, 40% of the vote, even though 60% of the voters chose someone else.
So you could actually win without having the majority support.
Exactly.
I could see why that would rub some people the wrong way.
Yeah.
But how does that tie into this, almost personal condemnation of certain labor figures?
Well, the author specifically names politicians like Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan.
Okay, yeah, I noticed that.
And they use some very strong language suggesting that these figures should be disqualified from holding office. It gets really intense, very emotionally charged.
And they link this anger directly to the election results. They're saying this supposed illegitimacy, on top of Labor's stance on figures like Trump and Musk, is a sign of something rotten at the core of the system. So what's their grand solution? They can't just ban everyone they disagree with.
Right. So that's where their proposal for a new electoral system comes in. They're big proponents of proportional representation, which, is used in quite a few countries around the world. It allocates parliamentary seats based on the proportion of votes each party receives nationally. The idea is to create a parliament that more accurately reflects, the overall will of the people.
So, if 40% of the country votes for Party A, they get roughly 40% of the seats in Parliament.
Exactly.
That does seem like it could lead to a more diverse representation. But, this isn't just about policy wonk stuff. They're really tying this into, a grand narrative about Trump, Musk, and, I don't know, a new world order or something.
You're picking up on it exactly. The author seems to see these figures, especially Trump, as representing this global shift. They even use the phrase socialist failure and dystopia, which, gives you a sense of their perspective. They really seem to believe that the UK needs to align itself with this wave of, they call it common sense, traditional values that they believe these figures represent.
And that's where their vision for a special relationship with English-speaking nations comes into play.
Right.
They're basically calling for this block of like-minded countries united by their legal systems, and I'm guessing their alignment with, this new world order, at least as they see it.
That's the gist of it, yeah. They're suggesting the UK should, distance itself from what they consider failing ideologies and sort of jump on board with this new wave of leadership with figures like Trump and Musk as the poster boys, maybe?
Wow. Yeah, okay. That's a lot to unpack. So they're basically calling for a complete, upending of the UK's political landscape, internally and on the global stage. But before we get lost in the big picture, there are some very specific accusations they level against the Labour Party, focused on their response to certain events.
Yeah, and it seems like Elon Musk ends up playing a rather central role in their argument.
They mentioned that he was, outraged over some comments made by Labour politicians. What exactly was he so upset about?
Oh, they claim that Musk was furious about specific labor figures sort of downplaying or dismissing accusations of child abuse within their constituencies.
Okay, that adds another layer to this, definitely. So they're suggesting that these accusations and Labor's, I guess, perceived inadequate response are further evidence of their unfitness to govern.
Yeah, that's what they're driving at. They even claim that Musk specifically called out Keir Starmer and the safeguarding minister. He accused them of complicity in covering up these acts, these horrific acts. They even go so far as to say that the UK Home Office had a team monitoring social media posts about these events, deeming them potential security risks.
So they're painting a picture of a pretty major controversy, one that even grabbed international attention, with figures like Elon Musk, weighing in and adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. And the author seems to applaud Musk's involvement. They suggest that his willingness to speak out brought these issues into the light, forced people to pay attention. They present him as someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo. They believe the UK needs more leaders like him, people who, aren't afraid to shake things up.
It definitely raises questions about the role of powerful individuals in shaping political discourse, especially now, in the age of social media.
Oh, absolutely. It's a double-edged sword. I mean, on the one hand, figures like Musk can amplify these issues, bring them to the forefront. But on the other, their involvement can really escalate tensions and even, contribute to the spread of misinformation.
And it's interesting how the author frames this whole thing as, like, another symptom of this rot, this deeper rot within the UK political system. They're saying this alleged cover-up, Labour's whole approach, really just points to a system that's broken and needs to be, ripped out and replaced.
That's really their central argument. They're presenting this scandal as evidence of everything they believe is wrong with the current establishment. It's just not serving the people anymore.
Right. But we should be careful, right, about just taking their claims at face value without considering, all sides of the story. We don't have access to Labour's response to these accusations or any independent investigations that might have happened.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's crucial to remember we're only getting one very specific perspective here, one interpretation. There could be a whole mountain of evidence or viewpoints we just don't have access to.
Okay, yeah, that's important. We got to keep that in mind. So what we're really getting here is a glimpse into the mindset of one very passionate and possibly very angry political organization. And this is all happening at a very specific moment in time.
Exactly. But by understanding their perspective, their fears, their aspirations, I think we can start to grasp this pivotal moment in UK politics and, maybe even get a sense of what the future holds.
Well said. Speaking of specific moments, they bring up another incident that, well, it definitely raised eyebrows at the time. Sadiq Khan and that infamous Trump baby blimp.
Ah, yes, that was quite a spectacle.
Definitely a visual I don't think anyone's going to forget.
During Trump's state visit back in 2018, Khan, he was mayor of London at the time, he allowed this giant inflatable blimp depicting Trump as a baby to be flown over the city.
Oh, I remember. It was meant as a protest against Trump's policies. His whole, persona, really.
Right.
Safe to say it caused quite a stir, to say the least. So how does our author view that whole incident?
But, well, they see it as a prime example of the Labor Party's, outright hostility towards Trump and really towards the U.S. as a whole. They specifically bring up the blimp when discussing the possibility of Trump, who's, potentially back in a position of power, seeking some kind of retribution against the UK for these perceived slights.
So they're saying that Khan's actions, which some might see as, a harmless protest, could have actual real-world consequences down the line.
That's their argument, yeah. It really highlights their underlying anxieties about the UK's relationship with the U.S. and how they feel the Labour Party has really jeopardized that relationship.
Yeah, they're basically saying, look, Labour's out there poking the bear, and that's not going to end well. Interesting how they tie this back into their whole narrative about the need for a political reset. Like they're saying, look, Labour's alienated our powerful allies, and we need a complete change, of course, if we want to have any kind of future.
Exactly. They're using these specific incidents to, strengthen their argument for this big overhaul. The system's broken. It can't navigate this complex geopolitical landscape. That's their message.
But it's important to remember, right, that this is their interpretation. There are others who would say that Khan was totally within his rights to approve the protest, that the blimp was, just harmless political satire.
Oh, absolutely. There are always multiple perspectives on every event. It's important to consider the full range of opinions before, forming your own conclusions.
Right, right. Multiple sides to every story. Okay, so we've got this intense criticism of the Labor Party, the dramatic call for a political reset. But they don't stop there, do they? They go on to allege some pretty serious wrongdoing on the part of Labor during the recent election.
Oh, they really don't hold back. They're claiming that Labor basically stole the election.
Wow, strong words.
Yeah, they accuse them of using all sorts of manipulative tactics, basically outright lying to voters, undermining the democratic process, the whole 9 yards.
So we're not just talking about policy disagreements or different political stances here. They're alleging actual election interference. What kind of evidence are they presenting?
Well, they point to, some vague statements and incidents from the campaign, alleging that Labor deliberately misled the public on key issues, but they don't really offer concrete proof. And, as always, we have to remember we're only hearing one side of this very complicated story.
It does feel like they're using these accusations as, like, fuel for their burn-it-all-down argument.
I know what you mean.
Everything circles back to this need for a total reset, with proportional representation as the cornerstone. It's like they're building a case, and every criticism, whether it's about individual politicians or, alleged election shenanigans, is just another brick in the wall.
That's a great way to put it. It's like they're saying, look, the system's so corrupt, so far gone, that nothing short of this radical solution, our solution, can save the UK.
And they're explicitly linking this whole internal political battle to this, global clash of ideologies.
Right.
They keep referencing Trump and Musk, these champions of a new way of thinking.
Right.
It's like they're saying the UK needs to pick a side in this global ideological war, and we know which side is right.
They're definitely tapping into this global trend. We've seen this rise of populism, this rejection of traditional political establishments happening all over the world. This blog post is kind of like, a microcosm of that larger movement.
So even though we're zeroed in on the UK, this deep dive is giving us a glimpse into something much bigger, something that's playing out on a global scale.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's kind of fascinating.
And they're doing it using very emotionally charged language, appealing to the sense of national identity, traditional values. They're creating a narrative where it's not just about left versus right. It's about saving the UK from what they see as this dangerous globalist agenda.
And it's all connected to their desire for this bloc of English-speaking nations united by, shared values, legal principles. It's like they're envisioning a new power structure, one that stands in opposition to the existing global order.
That's a really sharp observation. It's like they're saying the old alliances are crumbling, and the UK needs to find new partners based on shared culture, a shared vision for the future.
It's pretty extreme, wouldn't you say?
It's definitely a bold vision.
Like, they're advocating for a total break from the status quo. And it's hard to see how that kind of change could happen without some serious pushback.
It would be a massive shift, that's for sure.
Oh.
And we have to acknowledge that this blog post is, a very specific perspective. It might even be, a fringe perspective. We have to be careful not to, read too much into it.
Right. We're getting this really deep dive into this one point of view, but it's just one point of view. We don't have the whole picture.
It's like we're looking through a keyhole. We're getting a glimpse of something interesting, but we don't have the full view.
I like that, the keyhole analogy. But even if it's just a glimpse, it's still valuable, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's giving us a look into the passions, the anxieties that are really shaping the UK's political scene. And, who knows, maybe even the political landscapes of other countries.
I think that's right. Even though we're dealing with a limited perspective, it's still giving us insight into these larger trends, these forces that are at play.
So even if we don't necessarily agree with everything they're saying, just understanding their viewpoint helps us make sense of, this bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's one of the main goals of a deep dive like this. We're not trying to tell you what to think, but rather to give you the knowledge, the different perspectives, so you can form your own, informed opinion.
Well said. So let's circle back to their specific proposals. They don't just stop at electoral reform, right?
Oh, no, not at all. They're calling for a completely new constitution.
Whoa.
One that embodies their vision of common sense government.
Right.
Based on traditional values, a strong national identity, all of that.
And they seem to think this new constitution would lead to, a new breed of political leader. Individuals who, I guess, haven't been corrupted by, the current establishment.
Yeah, they're essentially calling for a clean slate, a complete reboot of the system. They want a fresh start led by people who share their vision.
Ambitious, to say the least.
Mm.
But is it realistic?
That's a great question. And what are the potential downsides, right, of such a radical transformation?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we, as critical thinkers, really need to wrestle with.
Oh, they don't. They really don't. They're basically saying that labor, well, they're accusing them of stealing the election.
Stealing the election?
Yeah, through all these manipulative tactics. Like they're saying labor lied to the voters, undermined the whole democratic process.
So it's not just criticizing policies or, political stances. They're alleging actual election interference. But what evidence do they give to support these claims?
Well, they point to, some vague statements and incidents from the campaign. They say labor deliberately misled the public on these key issues, but there's no concrete proof. And again, we have to remember, we're only hearing one side of the story here.
Right, of course. It's starting to feel like they're using these accusations to bolster their burn it all down argument.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Everything they bring up just leads back to this need for a total reset, with proportional representation as the big solution.
It's like every criticism, every accusation, whether it's about specific politicians or these alleged election shenanigans, it's all another brick in the wall of their argument,
Yeah, it's like they're saying, look, the system's so broken, so corrupt, that only our radical solution can save the UK.
Exactly.
And they connect this internal UK political battle to this global ideological clash.
Right.
They keep bringing up Trump and Musk like they're the poster children for this new way of thinking.
Yeah, they're tapping into this global trend, this wave of populism, this rejection of traditional political systems. It's everywhere. And this blog post, it's like a perfect example of that.
So even though we're focusing on the UK, this deep dive is actually showing us something much bigger.
Exactly.
Like the UK is a microcosm of this global struggle.
Yeah, and they're basically saying the UK has to choose a side in this ideological war.
Right, and they think they're on the right side.
Of course. And the language they use, it's very emotionally driven,
Yeah.
They're appealing to this sense of national identity, traditional values. It's like they're saying it's not just about left versus right.
Right.
It's about saving the UK from this dangerous, out-of-control globalist agenda.
Which brings us back to their idea of a bloc of English-speaking nations.
Right.
United by their shared values, legal principles.
Exactly.
It's like they're imagining this new world order.
Yeah, a new power structure to replace the old one.
But it's a pretty radical vision.
Oh, for sure.
Like they're calling for a complete break from how things are done now.
Right. They want a clean break.
It's hard to imagine that happening without a lot of resistance.
It would be a huge change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have to remember, this is just one very specific perspective.
Right. It's just one blog post.
It might even be a fringe perspective. It's important to keep that in mind.
So we're getting a deep dive into one particular point of view.
Yeah. We're looking through a keyhole,
Right. The keyhole, we get a glimpse, but not the whole picture.
Exactly. But even a glimpse can be valuable.
Oh, definitely.
It shows us what's driving this movement,
Right.
what they're afraid of, what they want.
So even if we don't agree with everything they say,
Right.
just understanding their perspective helps us make sense of the bigger picture.
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to do here. Not tell you what to think, but give you the information you need to form your own opinion.
Right. Provide the context.
Exactly.
So let's go back to their specific proposals for the UK. They don't just want electoral reform, do they?
No, they want a whole new constitution.
Wow. A new constitution.
Yeah, one that reflects their idea of common sense government,
Right. Based on those traditional values.
Exactly. A strong national identity.
And they seem to think this new constitution will bring about a whole new type of political leader.
Yeah, people who haven't been corrupted by the system.
Untainted by the establishment.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, let's wipe the slate clean and start over.
A complete reboot.
Exactly.
It's a bold vision. But is it really possible?
That's the question, isn't it?
And what are the potential downsides of such a dramatic change?
That's what we have to think about, as critical thinkers.
All right, so they've laid out their vision. But how do they actually plan to make this happen? They can't just snap their fingers and get a new constitution.
Well, they think it starts with the people.
The people.
Yeah, a groundswell of support. Like a movement of people who are tired of the way things are and want something new.
So they're calling for a revolution.
Kind of, but a peaceful one.
A peaceful revolution.
Yeah.
It's a very idealistic vision.
It is.
But it makes you wonder how much power a single blog post really has.
That's a good question. But I think it shows the power of ideas. especially in the digital age.
Right. This blog post could reach a global audience.
Exactly. It could spark conversations, get people thinking.
So even if it doesn't lead to a full-blown revolution,
Right.
it could still have an impact.
It could raise awareness, maybe inspire others to act.
It's like they're holding up a mirror to society
Yeah, showing us our anxieties, our frustrations.
and our hopes for the future.
Exactly.
But we have to remember, this is just one perspective, one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right. It's a snapshot of a particular moment in time.
A snapshot of a society struggling with these really complex issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even a snapshot can tell us a lot.
It can be incredibly revealing.
It can capture a feeling, an idea, a whole movement.
So let's dive a little deeper into their vision for electoral reform.
Okay.
They really believe that proportional representation is the key to a more just and democratic society.
They think the current system, first past the post, is fundamentally flawed.
Right.
They say it silences minority voices and keeps the two-party system in power.
And they think proportional representation would fix that.
They think it would give smaller parties a chance to compete, lead to a more diverse and representative government.
It's an interesting idea. But some people argue that proportional representation leads to weaker governments.
Right, because you often end up with coalition governments.
Which can be less stable, less effective.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
But supporters of proportional representation say those downsides are outweighed by the benefits.
Like what?
They say it forces parties to work together, find common ground, represent a wider range of views.
It's a complex issue, for sure.
It is.
But for the authors of this blog post, proportional representation is a crucial step towards their political reset.
It's not just about tweaking the system. It's about fundamentally changing how power works in the UK.
And they tie this back to their worries about global trends.
Right.
They say the UK needs a more flexible system to navigate this increasingly complex world.
They think the two-party system is too rigid, too stuck in the past.
So they see proportional representation as a way to modernize the UK, make it more responsive to the needs of its citizens.
Exactly.
It's a bold vision, and it raises some big questions about the future of democracy.
It does. It really does.
Especially in the digital age.
As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, think about these questions. What's next for the UK? How will technology and social media continue to shape politics? And how can we as individuals engage with these complicated issues?
We'll continue exploring these questions and more in the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the show. We've been really getting into this fiery blog post from wote.uk. Remember, they're this UK political group with, let's just say, a very particular vision for how things should be run. They're calling for a total reset of the UK political system. And, their big idea, their solution, proportional representation.
They really see it as like a cure-all, They argue that proportional representation would mean a wider range of voices in Parliament, forcing the big parties to actually listen to what people want.
But wouldn't that also potentially lead to more of those coalition governments? Some people say those can be kind of messy, right? Less stable, less effective at actually getting things done.
That's definitely a common criticism of proportional representation. Critics often point to the potential for, gridlock, instability, especially when things get tough, like during a crisis. But those who support it, they argue that those potential downsides are outweighed by the benefits.
Okay, so what are the benefits then?
Well, they say that coalition governments actually force those different parties to work together. They have to find common ground, represent a broader spectrum of views. It's more about compromise.
It's interesting to think about how that would actually play out in the UK. I mean, they've historically had such a strong two-party system. Would proportional representation really shake things up that much? Or would, the existing powers just find a way to adapt?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's really hard to predict how any big electoral reform would work in the real world. There are always those unintended consequences, and it's likely that the whole political landscape would shift in ways we can't even imagine right now.
And, WOTE.uk, they're not just focused on electoral reform. They want a whole new constitution, new leaders, the works. It's like they're calling for a revolution, but, a peaceful one, I guess.
Right. It's not about just making small changes. It's about transforming the whole system, the UK's political culture, its place in the world, all of it. And, this is where their interest in guys like Trump and Musk gets really interesting.
Yeah, they keep bringing them up, right? Almost like they're these, like folk heroes or something. They see them as these symbols of, moving away from those failed ideologies and moving towards a new era of common sense.
It's like they think the UK needs to get in line with this new world order, and Trump and Musk, well, they're the ones leading the charge. It's a very, us versus them kind of view, for sure.
And that brings us back to their idea of a special relationship with other English-speaking countries. They're basically proposing this, like, team up, you know, a block of like-minded countries united by their legal systems, their shared vision for the future.
It's a fascinating idea, but it also makes you wonder what kind of world that would create. Would it be one based on cooperation and, everyone getting along, or would it just reinforce those existing power dynamics and inequalities?
And what about the UK's relationship with Europe? They don't seem too keen on that whole thing.
That's a big question, isn't it? Essentially, they're talking about a complete realignment of global alliances, moving away from Europe and towards this new bloc of English-speaking nations. It's definitely a risk, and who knows what the long-term effects would be.
It's a lot to consider. This blog post, even though it's focused on the UK, has really given us a lot to think about when it comes to those big global trends and ideas.
We've talked about the rise of populism, the way social media is changing how we talk about politics, those shifts in global power, and that constant tension between holding onto tradition and embracing change.
Wow, yeah. It's been quite the deep dive.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap things up here, what should our listeners take away from all of this? What should they be thinking about as they go about their day?
I think the main takeaway is that we're living in a time of huge change and uncertainty, The old ways of doing things, they're not working anymore, and all these new ideas, new movements, they're challenging the way things have always been. This blog post, even though it's, a bit extreme, shows us that this is happening.
It's like a wake-up call, right? The future isn't set in stone. It's something we're actively creating through the choices we make, the actions we take.
And it's a reminder that we need to really engage with these issues, Think critically and be a part of that conversation about the kind of world we want to live in.
So as you're going about your day, think about what really stood out to you from this blog post. What did you agree with? What made you think, wait a minute, I don't think so? And, the biggest question of all, what does all this mean for you? For your place in this world that's changing so fast?
Keep those questions in mind, keep learning, and keep digging deeper. Thanks for joining us.